Wagwan, everybody. Welcome to the Dis Affamie History podcast, where we'll be speaking about history and as well family history and how history relates in terms of Caribbean people for the present as well as in the past, and how in the past, what that does and brings forth for what we are going through at present and what we can learn from our history, from our family, and take that moving forward. So I do hope you enjoy the podcast. And if you like it, please ensure to subscribe, like, and review. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone, to Dis Affamie History Podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Aris. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, thank you so much. I appreciate your support. This podcast exists because history is not just something we study, it is something we live. It shows up in our bodies, our migration, our documents, our silences, and sometimes in the things our families never talked about but still carried. Today's episode is a looking forward moment. I want to share what's coming up in season 8 and beyond, because this next stretch of the podcast is intentional, is layered, and honestly very close to the heart. So let's get into it. Season 8 will officially kick off with Dr. Christopher Stewart Taylor, who will be returning to the podcast for a deeper conversation on migration, based on his book Flying Fish in the Great White North, The Autonomous Migration of Black Caribbeans. And this time, we're going to be talking about the laws and policies that shape migration to Canada and how those laws impacted real people, real families, and real lives. The emotional, social, and psychological struggles people faced while navigating migration systems. This is not just about movement across borders. It's about what people endure to survive, belong, and build something better. If you or your family ever migrated or are still living the effects of it, this conversation will resonate. And in another episode, we will be joined by Ms. Gabrielle Gorard, who is the co-host of Caribbean Mystics, and she will be speaking all things Virgin Islands. And we'll be discussing in terms of what it means to be a U.S. territory, the impacts of that, and how the status impacts governance, identity, culture, and self-determination, and what often gets misunderstood or erased about Virgin Islands history. This is one of those conversations that remind us that colonial relationships don't disappear, they just change shape. And in another episode, I will be featuring Janelle Nixu, also known as Duke Hawaii, as he is the keeper of family history for his family, and we'll be discussing Indo-Jamaican history, indentureship, cultural survival, representation, and storytelling, as this episode will center on the complexity of Indo-Caribbean identity and challenges the idea that Caribbean history fits neatly into boxes. And season 8 will have some collaborations because history doesn't live in isolation, and neither should podcasts. And we'll hear conversations from one, Anna Xavier from Tradition Cafe, discussing first generation migration from Dominican Republic to the United States, which will be impacting family history, identity shifts, and what it means to carry two worlds at once. And second, we'll be speaking with Jennifer Hensel from the Women's Podcasters Network, where we talk about women's voices in media, storytelling as power, and community building. I'm also proud to share that This Affamie History podcast has been submitted for a podcast award with the Women's Podcasters Network. And this next topic of discussion, which is the church's role in Caribbean society, is very layered. However, it's very important that we do discuss because the church had a huge impact in Caribbean society. And I want to make sure that I'm very clear that this is not going to be a discussion about God, Yeshua, Jehovah, or Jesus. This is going to be a discussion about how the church operated as an institution of power. who benefited socially, legally, and economically, who was regulated to the margins. Morality, class, race, and respectability were enforced. And I realize this can be a charged subject. All I ask is that you have an open mind, because understanding how the church functioned historically helps us understand why certain hierarchies existed, how people navigated society, and how belief systems were sometimes used to justify inequality. These conversations are about history, not faith. And we're also going to be joined by Djamil Ninsoo, discussing his book, Full Money, which will be launched March 18, 2026. And this conversation brings together money as a tool, mental health, especially for men, freedom, agency, and redefining success. It's about unlearning survival modes and rethinking what a full life actually looks like. And I'm really looking forward to this episode with Professor Lamont discussing Never Forget Home and the history of Roatan, Honduras, where we're going to be exploring Black identity, migration, language, memory, and deep Caribbean connections that often get overlooked in Central American narratives. And if there's one thing that I can say is that you cannot do genealogy without history, and you cannot do history without genealogy. Documents alone don't tell the full story. Context matter, emotions matter, memories matter. Genealogy is not just a hobby, although that's how it's presented and how most people practice it. However, it becomes a journey of self-discovery, and oftentimes healing is involved in ways you don't expect. That's why we'll also be featuring Carry Genetics. It is a Caribbean company out of Bermuda, and they are founded on the principles of inclusivity, innovation, and integrity. And they are at the vanguard of genetic research with a laser focus on the distinct genetic blueprint of Caribbean ancestry. And we'll be discussing in that episode genetic testing methods, how DNA can assist when documents are scarce, and how testing helps identify regional origins when the paper trail ends. So this should be a very powerful and a very informative conversation. And so, that is a glimpse into season 8 and beyond. And, this podcast continues because history deserves honesty and care, and because your stories matter. If there is, a topic you'd like to see explored, a community you want centered, or a history you feel has been ignored, please reach out and let me know. And if you haven't already, please like, share, subscribe. It helps the channel immensely and ensures these conversations reach the people who need them. And all of the guests that have been mentioned or featured in today will be listed in the show notes. And as always, I want to thank you for listening and for walking with me in this journey. So walk good and take care.
Hoped you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and write a review for the episode wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you.